Hi guys, sorry for the late post. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about the three major financing mechanisms used to fund higher education. First is the allocation of taxpayer resources to fund the operation of institutions, particularly those that are publicly supported by the state. The second one is the setting of the tuition prices at public institutions. And the third one is the funding levels and rules of determining eligibility for award size for state-funded student aid programs. So for allocation, more than 90% of the state funding for higher education is provided in the form of support to public institutions for instruction and operations. For most of the nation's history, allocations of the taxpayer dollars to public institutions were almost primarily political decisions. In the late 50s, states began to realize that taxpayer support couldn't be distributed based on political strength, and due to the projected growth of higher education, the decision to expand access by borrowing to build was accompanied by a shift from politically based distribution to allocations for operating expenses based on number of students who are enrolled. So we shift for political strength to now students enrolled in the institutions. In the 1970s, a shift from distribution based solely on enrollment to now also include the utilization of resources. And then in the 1980s, states began to allocate some of their funds for public institutions based on performance measures such as graduation. Based off of other countries such as Denmark, Israel, and the U.S. is now debating on whether states should build output or outcomes-based performance measures into the distribution funding. My thoughts were, what do you guys think about that? Should it be more based on outcomes or numbers? So the second one is setting tuition. Some states, the state legislature plays a major role. In a smaller number of states, governors and their staff have a direct role. But in the most states, public institutions have the principal responsibility for setting their tuition, while the governors and legislators' role is more of making sure that they don't go over the set amount that they're allowed. So the maximum rate. In the number of states, tuition revenue from public institution is funneled back to the state, and in other states, tuition and fees are retained by the institution to spend as they see fit. Maintaining low or no tuition has long been viewed as the principle for public policy mechanism for providing access to higher education for most of the country's history. But in the 1970s, reports stated that states should move away from a policy of low tuition to one based more on cost sharing between states and families. My question is, do you guys agree with that? Should families have a cost sharing with the state for their education? Me personally, I would say yes. I think families should have some input and some responsibilities for that. It wasn't until the recession of the early 1980s that public sector began to climb, and state legislators and public institutions began to favor the idea of cost sharing. The recession of the early 90s, most states moved towards a system of cost recovery, where tuition rates are set formally or informally as proportion of cost per student. And the last one to talk about is state student aid. State Student Incentive Grant Program changed the picture of student aid in 1972. Need-based grants has been primarily the focus of aid. In 1993, the creation of the Hope Scholarship Program set a trend in state student aid. The trend was now going to a merit-based aid system. As a result of the Hope Scholarship Program, a number of states emulated this program by initiating programs where middle-class students were primary beneficiaries, and the shift towards merit-based aid semi-reduced the needs-based aid which has become a concern. You still have both aid, and needs-based aid is still just as important and just as high as merit-based aid, but now they're seeing the percentage of merit-based getting increased more than needs-based. In the 1990s, prepaid tuition plans became popular, but in the recent years they have declined in popularity. As a result, states are increasingly relying more on defined contribution plans to promote savings rather than prepaid plans. So that's kind of all I have for these three. There's a lot of information out there, and I just kind of wanted to pick the things that stood out the most to me. If you feel free to add anything on the discussion board, and I will be happy to discuss further with you guys. Thanks, and have a great day.